Hey guys, welcome out again to Revolution. I'm going to do part 3 of examining the King James only debate. So last night I did part 2. It went for about 2.5 hours. And so I felt like I really need to go through this. And so one of the reasons why I'm doing it back to back is because oftentimes you're looking up a whole bunch of information. You've got it sitting there ready on your laptop or in other places, and through the week you have to shut all those pages down and do other things. And so I just felt like I would continue and do as much as I can today. And so we're going to just jump straight back into the video. So we're going to be starting at the 36-minute mark, 36:35 seconds. And so I'm just going to start there, and I'm pretty sure this is just me speaking after this. So we'll just continue, and if this is the first video you watched, this is part 3. So we've had a debate, and I've already done 2 previous videos talking about the debate. So this is a video number 3 concerning a commentary on this debate. So basically the debate is about the pericope adulteri, and so Stephen Boyce has written an article saying that those 12 verses shouldn't be in the Gospel of John, or are not original to the Gospel of John, and he does say that they shouldn't be in there. And I've also written a book on Revelation 16:5 and why the reading that's found in the Textus Receptus and the King James Version is original. Okay, so let's take it from there.
All right, very interesting. We are definitely getting into it now. Let's begin this kind of cross-examination. This section's a little more informal, so it's just kind of, you get to dialogue. I'm going to let Nick lead first, though, and I think we'll start off with talking about, with John there, pericope there, because that's, I think, where Nick started off in his opening statement. So, yeah, we'll begin there, take half of this time to just kind of discuss that. Nick, you can begin leading that with, whatever questions or objections you have for Stephen.
Cool, so I've got about 10 minutes, or 5 minutes.
This section's kind of informal. It's just kind of conversation between the two of you, so I'll let you talk it out.
So I was, Stephen, I was just going through another article you wrote about the Gospel of Thomas.
Yeah.
And I enjoyed it. I thought it was very good and accurate. But there were 3 criteria that you had there for something to be included into the Gospels. And I'll just quickly read those 3. It's firstly, it must have divine attributes within its pages. But you mentioned in the pericope adulteri article that everything about the story looks and sounds like Jesus. Secondly, it must be traced back to the apostles, and you actually do trace this back to Luke, to an apostle. Then thirdly, it must be corporately received by the church as a whole.
Sure.
And so, and I believe that, obviously there was some early hiccups in that I believe are explained by the lectern cycle, but 85% of the manuscripts have it, and even in modern times they've tried to omit this verse, and the churches, like in 1946, the Revised Standard Version, they tried to omit it, and there was a lot of pressure to put it back in, and they put it back in to the main text. And so it seems like the church wants it in there. So these 3 criteria that you mentioned about something being worthy of canonicity in your other article, that to me they apply by the standards that you've revealed in your article.
Yeah, I think those things are important, but they don't guarantee canonicity. In fact, I even stated in there that I think it's a true story. I think there's a lot of true stories, and I mentioned the verse in John chapter, I believe it's 21, where he said that many things were done by Jesus, said and done by Jesus, that the libraries of the world cannot contain. I happen to believe a lot of those survived. To be canon, they need to meet that criteria, but just because something makes that criteria, it doesn't automatically, well, that's canon. I do not confirm 100%. Well, Luke absolutely put this in his special material. I actually gave more of a theory, like this is what I believe happened. I'm not saying it's true. It just makes sense based on some of the syntax as well as some of the Lucanisms that are in there. And it's more of a theory. But I agree that there has to be a criteria. But the question, Nick, is when we look back into the first 400 years of the church, you're saying, well, the church has accepted this. Yeah, but not in the earliest portions of the church. Where is the evidence that they received this as John's writing? Not true. I agree with you that this story has been accepted as a true story. Papias mentioned it. I'm sure you'd recognize Jerome's citations of it, Augustine's citations, Eusebius' citations of it. I think people on my end have gotten foolish where they're pretending like it didn't happen or something. I actually agree it happened. My question is did John write it? And 5 of the best witnesses that we have to represent the first few hundred years of the church are 2 papyri that are dated, 175, late 2nd century, P75, P66. They do not have it in there.
And so, as I mentioned later in the debate, these particular 2 manuscripts, we don't have the final readings for these 2 manuscripts, in a sense where at times this portion, these 12 verses, was sometimes moved to the back of the book of John, because in the Lectern cycle they had left this out, and so at times it was moved to that position. And so that's where we're not sure. Perhaps it was in there, but in the back of the book. And so this is one of the issues that I bring up continuously about looking, say, at the first 400 years. It sounds very novel. Sorry, not novel, but it sounds very honourable to do that, and it sounds like why wouldn't we do that? Because obviously that's closer to the time of the writing of Scripture. But oftentimes what happens is, even if you look at Codex Vaticanus and Codex Sinaiticus, these 2 manuscripts, they vastly differ from each other. And there's a lot of difference, there's a lot of errors. And so that's just in the 2 most famous ones. When you start going through papyri, there can be huge differences. And so which readings are correct? And I'm not saying that we shouldn't study these things. I'm not saying that we shouldn't look into these things. But as I've mentioned, it's fragmentary. To me, many of the stories that come out of this era are a bit like, when we look at evolution, they might find Lucy. And you walk into a museum and there is a complete half monkey, half man, sculpture staring right at you. And they say, well, that's one of your ancestors. And it's like, hang on, how did you get that from this fragmentary, from this bit of bone here and this other leg they found elsewhere, and how did you get this? And so this is one of the things with the first 400 years. Oftentimes people in this generation are relying on the scholarship of Metzger, they're relying on the scholarship of Baader Ehrman, and so many times these issues come up, and evidence is put forward, but it's served on a plate with a whole serving of bias with it. And so, like I've mentioned, almost everything to do with the King James Version, the Textus Receptus, you have to go through a mountain of weeds just to get to some general facts. And that's only 400, 500 years ago. When you're looking at, 1,600 years ago or 2,000 years ago, you're looking at a lot of bias that goes with this. And so I think I have gravitated towards some of what Jeff Riddle said, even though I think at times I understand the frustration of restorationists and how, Jeff Riddle would just say, God preserved his word. It's just God did a miracle sort of thing. It's like, I can understand the frustration with that, and hopefully people can see that I will go to the mat on these issues and go through, like Revelation 16:5, and look at the evidence, look at the internal, external evidence. And I think Jeff Riddle does that at times, but I think I can understand why someone could get frustrated. But I have gravitated toward his understanding, where he's like, hang on, I don't think we've actually got enough evidence to actually rebuild the Bible today. In a sense where God has promised to preserve his word in the Bible. And so where has that word been? Now, I know a lot of people would say, well, where was it before the text of Receptus? Or where was it before the King James onlyist or whatever? But we could easily turn that around and say, okay, so guys, where was your Bible? Or where is your Bible? At least we're saying, okay, this is it. Where, and you got to understand that we have been dealing with James White for the last 30 years. And so James White, he will say things, that we are cultists, we're just King James onlyists with a cultic mindset, we're just like the Jehovah's Witnesses, just like the Mormons. Now, so oftentimes when we're defending ourselves, we're saying things, that can be pretty harsh and can be pretty full on, because we are used to a battle. We're used to jumping into the ring and someone's playing dirty with us and trying to. They're breaking all the rules, so we're used to that. I don't want to taint every critical text guy with the same brush. But what I do find is, Dan Wallace, James White, these guys are not willing to learn. I actually contacted James White about this material, and I wanted to talk to him about it and to see, if he would, at least try and understand it. He had no interest. And then he's like, I won't even take his book. This guy's desperate. This guy's a psycho. Yeah, pretty much that's what he was saying. He'd say it in a nice way. So he would say, I used to know a person who was really way out there, and he was a librarian, and he just used to sit there all the time, just focused on, the Comma Johanneum in Latin manuscripts. He was a real weirdo, there are people out there like that, and this Revelation 16:5 guy, this TR guy, he's like that. So he's basically just called me a psycho, and that's just one of the things he said. And so it does actually surprise me when I read through some of these groups and they're shocked at, a King James guy will call them a name or something, or say you're unsaved, and it's like, guys, just go and listen to the dividing line. Go and listen to one of your main apologists and how crass he is. And even people, because I can be pretty loose and I can say things and I don't have this heavy accountability of elders and guys all over me and all the rest of it. But some of these guys are in churches where it's pretty strict. And I know someone like, say, Robert Truelove and Jeff Riddle, these guys watch their P's and Q's, but they're still called Mormons and, mindset of a Mormon. You're just like the Muslims. It's like, because you have a text. So the Muslims say they have a text. The TR guys say they have a text. Oh, you're just like the Muslims. And, there's a whole bunch of baggage that goes with that. And so, say James White, he has come out and said in recent videos that pretty much everything that he's sort of learnt almost has to be thrown out because we've got the CBGM that's come on the scene, and so this is going to change everything. So he had a caller. It went for about 10 minutes, and he's saying, what book should I read, etc. And he's like, look, there's new technology coming. So it's a bit like, we're transitioning from Windows to Mac. We're just forget everything you've learned. We're just going to do something completely different. And James White said that the CBGM will probably come out with a definitive Bible by 2030. And so this is the thing. Critical text guys don't have a Bible. They don't have a definitive Bible. And so this is one of the issues. And even if you can pinpoint down, Will Kinney used to say to James White, which Bible do you read? Which Bible do you promote? And he wouldn't answer the question. Just read my books, and you read through his books, and he's got the NIV and the New King James, and he's got all these other ones. And he'll even, so this has really got to do with James White. This has nothing to do with Stephen. But he would say things like, in his book, he's promoting the NIV, but with his debate conversation thing with Stephen Anderson, he said, look, I'm not going to defend the NIV. It's a liberal translation. But why did he defend it in his book? And so it just brings about confusion, because we're the ones say, okay, this is the Bible. We have the Text Receptus, and we have the King James Bible. That's the Bible. And so you've got people from all different angles just throwing darts at that position. And we're turning around and saying, okay, so where's your Bible? And even when you look at the whole Gurry Snap Riddle conversation, when Riddle would pinpoint them down, or pinpoint Gurry especially down on a certain point, he would say, well, if you don't like that reading in the Nestle Allen 28, the conjectural emendation, go to the Tyndale House. So it's just go to a different Bible. So now they've got different Greek texts that they can go to. So it used to be, the different versions based upon that, but now they've got multiple Greek texts that are the Word of God. And so what we're seeing is there's a lot of confusion brought about by this, because at the end of the day, where is the Bible? And when you get someone like Dan Wallace and James White disagreeing about which words are in the Bible, who do you go to? Which guru do you go to? And it's all about authority. So the thing is, the Word of God is the authority. And when you look at what Scripture says about itself, the Bible says about itself that it will endure forever. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my word shall by no means pass away. We have the Word of God. When you read Psalm 119, there's many verses in there talking about the Word of God being pure, being with us. When you read Psalm chapter 12, when you read many things that Jesus says, you'll be judged by my words and things like that. The Bible has its own criteria about what is the Word of God. The critical text doesn't match that criteria because it's only been around since basically Westcott and Hort. And then if you look at the majority text, that's only been around since the 1980s, and really there's no one even translating anything from that. I think I've got a little Gospel of John done by the guys who did the New King James. It's called the King James Version 21st Century Edition or something like that. It's a little pocket-sized book, but they have that based on majority text. And so at the end of the day, sorry, I'm just having trouble with my laptop here. It's freezing up on me. It's better. At the end of the day, we're debating with people who haven't got a definitive Bible, and their Bible can change at any moment. And so if someone finds a manuscript in a cave tomorrow that has, the Gospel of John, but when we get to John 3:16, it's missing John 3:16, and it's gone, and they say, well, this is the oldest manuscript we have of John, they will try to omit that from the next edition. So this is why we're like, hang on, guys, and oftentimes there is preference put upon Vaticanus and Sinaiticus. Now I know Stephen later on he sort of says, look, I hope you can understand that I'm not just advocating for those, but at the end of the day, if you don't believe the last 12 verses of Mark are there, that's because you have a favoritism towards Vaticanus and Sinaiticus. They're the two manuscripts that don't have those 12 verses. To omit 12 complete verses because of that reason is huge. And so I know that the recent article that Elijah Hickson did was praised by many people, and I think Jeff Riddle did a great job. Even though Jeff Riddle is not a text expert, he just points out a few issues here and there, and it's enough to write off a lot of these guys and what they're saying. And so anyway, so I'll just let Stephen continue to talk, but I just thought I'd mention that many of the leading guys in the field, I know a lot of people don't like to be associated with James White, but he is one of the leading experts. Metzger praised his book, King James Only Controversy. There's, say, when you look at Dan Wallace, Dan Wallace is considered one of the greatest experts in the United States on the text. Even Bart Ehrman, and going through Stephen's article, this one here, if we just type in Ehrman, he does get some of his ideas from Ehrman. And so I'll just quickly go through some of these. He's like, after examining both stories from Didascalia and the Gospel of Hebrews, it would appear that these two stories combine to fill in the missing links of the narrative we see in the Gospel of John. I affirm and agree with Bart Ehrman that these two accounts are a conflation to make one complete story. So Ehrman, in his 1988 landmark article on the PA, wrote, and then he's got what Bart Ehrman wrote. Now, I understand that not everything Bart Ehrman says is wrong, but some of the history that Bart Ehrman says, I've read most of Bart Ehrman's books. Lately, most of his books that have come out, sort of since I think it was God's problem. It's just how God's just evil, and the problem of evil. And you listen to that, and it's just like listen to someone have a big whinge, and he sort of leaves the devil out. It's like, where's Satan in all this? But Bart Ehrman would say correct things about certain people in history, and Luckman and Mill and some of that history, and I think the thing is, he is bringing it to a popular audience, and not many people have ever talked about these guys before. So many times it's the first time people will hear those names, and so not everything he says is wrong, not everything he says is historically wrong, but I think to side with Ehrman, personally, I would not mention Ehrman. I know Stephen said that he is just a brilliant guy and all the rest of it, and he's one of the smartest guys in text criticism. I mean, to me, when I listen to Bart Ehrman, when he talks, say, about the King James Bible, and so that's a topic I know quite a bit about, his reasoning is absolutely ridiculous. And so I'll probably do, later on, I'll probably do some videos about Bart Ehrman, because I'll run out of, James White material and all the rest of it. But I've watched and listened to a whole heap of Bart Ehrman stuff, and I've just thought that this is just ridiculous. What he's saying is not accurate at all. And so to side with Ehrman here on this issue, it says here, I stand in agreement with Bart Ehrman that the PA found in John's Gospel is a conflation of the two early accounts of the Didascalia and the Gospel of Hebrews. So it's, from reading Bart Ehrman's material. Let's continue down. I find myself agreeing with Bart Ehrman on this. And then we see, although I do not agree with Bart Ehrman's final conclusions about Scripture, his work and research are some of the best available today. I would say the exact opposite. I would say Bart Ehrman's conclusions are some of the worst. Now, I understand his final conclusion are atheism, but I've just been going through a lot of James White stuff now. But see, the thing is, James White and Bart Ehrman and Dan Wallace, they're not that much in disagreement. I've listened to all their debates several times, and many times it's like, well, they're in agreement, but they're just in disagreement about the outcome. And so James White, he will hate the fact that Bart Ehrman will say, open up your Bible to here and try to look up this verse. See, it's not there, where James White does exactly the same thing, but turns around and says, but you can still believe and trust in God, and it's like, to me, there's just no difference. If someone's just destroying your faith in the words of God, and just showing you, hey, there's errors in the Bible, and you're just going to have to deal with that. Whether it's a smiling assassin or an angry assassin, to me, you're still being assassinated. some more. Therefore, I agree with Ehrman that this was inserted to prove Jesus was not illiterate. So there's quite a lot in this that's from Bart Ehrman and from his 1988 thesis. Let's continue down. So then we've got two quotes, Bart Ehrman. So Bart Ehrman and the Adulteress, Bart Ehrman and Lost Scriptures. So I know Bart Ehrman was with Bruce Metzger. But see, the thing is, when someone quotes Bruce Metzger, to me personally, I just think of someone like Bart Ehrman. I just think of someone who, to me, someone like Bruce Metzger is just absolutely so far detached from Christianity. To me, it's like quoting a Jehovah's Witness. It's like saying, I don't know the name of the leaders of the Jehovah's Witnesses, but just say it was Joe Smith. Joe Smith said this about this verse. It's like, I don't really care what he said about one of the things was, when I first became a Christian, I had the Jehovah's Witnesses knock on my door about 100 times in the first year of my Christianity. And so they would just continuously come to my door, and I'd be talking to them, and they would give me books about anti-Trinity books. They would give me pamphlets. They would give me all sorts of things. And so I would study about the mistakes in their Bible. And so I basically learned all about the Bible version issue from the Jehovah's Witnesses. And so I was defending our church basically read the New King James. And so, but I was defending, King James TR readings. And so I would be debating with these Jehovah's Witnesses. But then a few years later, we started getting other versions of the Bible. So this is going back to the mid-90s. And it's like, hang on, this NIV, that they take that verse out too. And I'm like, hang on. And so a lot of, from my point of view, coming from a totally non-Christian background, to come to the church, to have a Bible you're trusting and you're enjoying, and then to meet the Jehovah's Witnesses who are a cult, and basically they openly would say, well, Christianity just sort of faded away for like 1,500 years. And so, we had the Bible back then, and we've got the Bible now, but in between it was just all this other mishmash happening. And then you're realizing, hang on, mainstream Christianity are accepting all these Bibles that pretty much have almost the same story, that the Bible has just sort of faded away for 1,500 years. We have to go back to the first 400 years sort of get what's really there. This is what the Jehovah's Witnesses were teaching. And so I was just seeing similarities between what the Jehovah's Witnesses were saying and what these modern evangelicals were saying. And so, people like Bart Ehrman, Bruce Metzger, Kurt Aland, way back to Westcott and Hort, and many of these guys are deeply compromised and have strange teachings. Like Bruce Metzger, even if this didn't have Bart Ehrman, if it had Bruce Metzger, I would say, look, Bruce Metzger, he questioned whether, say there's mistakes in the genealogy of Matthew chapter 1. Bruce Metzger believes that Matthew made that mistake. And so, when it says every word of God is inspired, God breathed. God, as soon as the writer was writing the words of God, it came from God. God breathed into those words. They are inspired by God. But he believes Matthew just made a mistake in the genealogy in Matthew chapter 1. And so, that's Bruce Metzger. That's one of the heroes of the last century. And so, to me, a lot of these scholars have massive problems. And I think this is one of the main problems that I'm seeing is people just sort of jump in and read these guys, read their materials, and come up with conclusions that are faulty. Now, I understand that can happen in any group, King James onlyists. They can just grab, some article somewhere and just adopt that and believe that and run with that and quote, well, I got it from here, and people in the back of their mind are just laughing at it. But I think someone like Bart Ehrman, he's on a different level, and I think to sort of from what I see Stephen's trying to do, he's trying to have a defense for why we don't believe this is the word of God, and, I guess trying to say, his reasoning. But to sort of point to I got this information from Bart Ehrman. It's like, man, to me, it's like I got this from watchtower.org. To me, it's very dangerous. Bart Ehrman is one of the most dangerous people around today. He is causing massive doubt. He is causing people to hate and despise the words of God, and I think we need to question everything that he's written, regardless of whether he's in the doors of orthodoxy or not. Most of the people, who write books for Brill and Tyndale House and all the rest of it, they have to sign statements saying, yes, I believe this and I believe that. And it just takes someone like Bart Ehrman to say, look, I'm not signing those things anymore. I'm just going to come out and say I'm an atheist. But a lot of these people in these groups are not saved. They're not born again Christians. And so it's interesting that Wasserman is actually, he doesn't believe in hell. He doesn't believe in an eternal hell. And so I think that would have quite a fair bit to do with his theological reasoning. And, he said things like, we should approach the text as if God doesn't exist, and this sort of thing. And so, but this has been going on for years. And, we saw, Carlo Martini basically on the Nestle Alien United Bible Society text board. He was in line to be a pope. It's, I don't think you can get much worse than that. And so we're just talking about, these other guys. But, I mean, Carlo Martini. And so I think people really need to look at who these guys are. Westcott and Hort had George Vance Smith, a Unitarian, on their translation committee, on their editorial committee. And so he was a Unitarian, a bit like a Jehovah's Witness. And there was a massive uproar about it. People were saying, look, this guy doesn't believe in the Father, Son, the Holy Spirit, doesn't believe in the Trinity. But he was with Westcott and Hort. So I think, people need to be looking at that. And the day that I meet a text critic who says, yes, Westcott and Hort shouldn't have had a Unitarian. That the United Bible Society guys, they shouldn't have had Carlo Martini. Yes, Bruce Mesker said things that were off the wall. Yes, Bart Ehrman, even in his so-called Orthodox years, had said some strange things, and believing that the Orthodox Christians perverted the Bible instead of people like Origen and Marcion and all the rest of it. But anyway, I'm going to continue on with the video, or else I'll rabbit trail everywhere.
We have the two manuscripts you mentioned earlier, Aleph and B, that do not have it in there either, which are complete Gospels, 4th century, early 300s. But within that, we need to recognize that Sinaiticus, the first 8 chapters of Sinaiticus are not Alexandrian readings anyway. The first 8 chapters of John are Western, more so Western readings than Alexandrian. So we have the oldest witness there of the Western manuscripts that bring it in Sinaiticus, and it does not have it. And then we have one, I believe, the most important Byzantine manuscript that exists, and that's Codex A, Alexandrinus. Alexandrinus is Byzantine in the Gospels, but in the epistles it's actually Alexandrian, which I believe is the most important witness of the Byzantine family, in my opinion. There's good Byzantine manuscripts, but I think it's one of the most important for the Gospels. It does have marks in there, but there's no notes. But in it, it does not have the story either. So the oldest witness of the Byzantine does not have it. The oldest witness of what would be considered a Western reading does not have it. The oldest witness of the Alexandrian and Vaticanus does not have it. And the oldest papyri do not have it either. The first introduction that we see to it in John's Gospel is a Western manuscript, which I'm sure you're familiar with, Codex D. Codex Beze, named after Theodore Beze. And I think you would agree, if you've examined that manuscript at all, it is not a reliable manuscript. And in that manuscript, these lectionaries that you're referring to, there are the asterisks there that even later on, Robinson, who I have tremendous respect for, Maurice Robinson is a tremendous scholar. Love his work. I've followed his work for years. He states that those asterisks were obviously placed later, and he links them to a 9th or 10th century lectionary. So we have one of the most unreliable manuscripts that introduces it. And then we have the previous manuscripts that I just listed do not have it. So yeah, we can talk about numbers, and I find it interesting, and we'll get into this more. You're vying for numbers here. Like, well, the most manuscripts, 85% of manuscripts have it, so it should be accepted. Then why can't you accept that in Revelation 16:5 when there's no manuscripts that have the reading? You're arguing numbers here, but you're not in the other passage, which we'll get to. But I don't see that consistent in your argument as well. But just because something has the canonical criteria doesn't mean it has to be automatically accepted as inspiration.
Yeah, we'll hit Revelation. Let's let Nick respond to that.
Okay, so I think my question was pretty good, because what I did is I read one of Stephen's articles on the Gospel of Thomas, and I actually listened to him talk about it, and he mentions about 3 criteria. I can't remember exactly what the criteria were, but what I was saying was, well, the Gospel story of the Pericope Adulterae matches those 3 criteria. And I thought that was a pretty good, valid point, that it's been accepted by the church, and it's looks like Jesus. And when we look at Stephen's article, one of the first things he says is, I'll just jump up the top here. It says, the Pericope Adulterae, henceforth PA, is one of the most well-known and beloved passages in the Bible. Everything about the story looks, sounds, and acts like Jesus. And so this, what I was saying was, you were saying that I wasn't saying that this is my criteria. I'm saying that according to your criteria of the Gospel of Thomas, and why it should be included or why it shouldn't be included, he mentions 3 things. And so I just pointed out in this article, it's like, okay, well, it looks like Jesus, acts like Jesus. It has no theological difference in a sense, but I believe there is. But you can, if I'm to go along with what most critical text guys say about it, they say, it doesn't really matter. You can delete that and it doesn't matter. Well, I believe it does. I believe I've actually been at loggerheads with people over this verse, because they're justifying someone, committing adultery or sleeping around, and I'm like, hey, hang on. And they're like, no, Jesus forgave the adulterous woman. And people, it's the way people interpret that. And, I know some people, they don't have that interpretation, but some people do. And that's what we see with Augustine. He was saying, look, I suppose, he was supposing, but he was saying, I suppose that some people, they don't want it in the Bible because, some people use that as like, I can commit adultery and Jesus will just forgive me. And haven't we heard that? They turn the grace of God into lasciviousness. The grace of God becomes like lewdness. It becomes something that, God will just forgive me, don't worry about it. I'll just go out and sin. I'll do whatever I want. I'll get drunk, or I'll get stoned. And, the grace of God forgave the adultery, So many people point back to that story as just, God will just forgive whatever you want. One of the things when I was reading through this recently, I was like, hang on, Jesus actually said, okay, he who is without sin, throw the first stone. And I almost pictured like Jesus grabbing the rocks, putting it in their hands and go, okay, let's do this. But if you're without sin, do it. And because I believe it was actually a bit of a setup, but the narrator does actually say that there was a woman caught in adultery. So it's like, well, I don't think she was pretending, but there was something not right there. And so when you read through John chapter 7 and the last few verses there, they were trying to catch Jesus out with the law. And so you see Nicodemus has basically said to them, do you judge anyone according to our law? They're talking about, judging someone with 2 or 3 witnesses and all this sort of stuff. So I think what they were trying to do is they were trying to see what Jesus would do. So then they could accuse him. Then they could say, oh, you didn't do the law properly. Or, they were trying to get him out on a technicality. Because where was the man? They got the woman caught in adultery. Where's the man caught in adultery? And so, that's the whole issue. And then when you read later on in in chapter 8, Jesus is clearly talking about 2 or 3 witnesses. He's talking about, the Father bears witness of me, and all this sort of stuff. And so the whole issue flows through that. The whole theme of having 2 or 3 witnesses. If you just, if you were to, after this video, just grab the Bible and just start reading John chapter 7 and 8, and just read through it and look for those themes of the 2 or 3 witnesses. You can see it all the way through that. And so, so anyway, I thought I made a pretty valid point about the 3 criteria with the Gospel of Thomas. That, I'm not saying they're my criteria, but I'm saying that that's the criteria that he wrote in another article. And when I applied to this, this seems to apply. It seems to fit. So I'm just going to read some quotations now. I said in my first video, in the second video, that I would quote the exact quotations of the early church writers. So what I'm going to do, I've actually just copied some things from Confessional Bibliology, Chris's website, and I've also got some things from James Snap. And but Paul J. Barth, so this was a little while ago, he wrote, "I will list some early church testimony that sufficiently disproves Dr. White's assertion." So obviously he's answering James White. That the Prickabay adulteri did not exist until the 5th century. The Diatessaron, a harmony of the Gospels from the 2nd century, quotes it, although Schaff's publication doesn't contain it because it was based on a single Arabic manuscript. Nearly all other Diatessaron manuscripts have been discovered since have included it. The Didascalia of the 3rd century and the Apostolic Constitutions, 4th century, quote it. Jerome and Augustine both comment on it, and Augustine said wicked scribes were removing it. Didymus the Blind, a Greek father in the 4th century, quotes it, and Papias, 2nd century, references it. Considering these things, it would seem that the account was in manuscripts before the 5th century that are no longer extant. And so, obviously this is dealt with by Stephen. In his article, he's basically saying that these stories, that Luke originally wrote the story, and then so this is one of the things where, as I mentioned, basically it comes down to the style of writing. So the style of writing in this section, Stephen is saying, is Lucan. But when we look at Hodges and Farstead, and actually it was Pierpont and Hodges, sorry, when we look at their argumentation, they say, no, it's clearly Johannine, and people who say it's Lucan are mistaken. And so you have people from people who aren't King James TR guys, that they're both basically saying, the one's saying it's John, one's saying it's Luke. It's like, at the end of the day, I don't think that can be used as an argument to whether this should be in or out. And so I think that's relied on too heavily in Stephen's article. And I understand that Stephen in his article is saying that Luke wrote this because the writing is Lucan. In his Proto-Luke. So you got to believe that Luke wrote it because the words are Lucan. There's certain words that only really appear in the Gospel of Luke, and they don't appear in other places of John. But like I said, there are other scholars who disagree with that. But then this is part of Proto-Luke. So this is before Luke's final product, which is non-existent. This is just... it's like the Q document. This doesn't exist. It's never been found. It's just someone's concept and idea of Proto-Luke. And so then Proto-Luke sort of got copied, and then it ended up being these other formats of this story, and Stephen keeps relating us back to, John at the end of his book saying, hey, Jesus did lots of things, and if we were to write about them, it would fill all the libraries in the world. That's Stephen's own words. But at the end of the day, there's really no proof. It basically hinges on whether it's Lucan or Johannine, and because of the theory that there is this sort of draft of the Gospel of Luke that we've never found. No, it's a made up thing, and then that's become these other stories that was quoted by the early writers, and the Gospel of the Hebrews and other issues. And so what I'll do is I'll just keep reading through some of the information I have here, and hopefully by the last video I will have been able to explain it a little bit clearer to you of exactly Stephen's position, because I don't want to misrepresent him. So this is so in short, we have no legitimate reason to doubt Augustine's testimony about the passage being removed from the manuscripts, and certainly no reason to dismiss it out of hand without at least serious consideration. So that was the last part of Paul J. Barth's comment. So when we look at Jack Mormon, so Jack Mormon's done quite a lot of research into backing up the TR and the difference between the TR and the majority text. He has the textual evidence for the inclusion of John 7:53 to John 8:11 is both massive and widespread. According to Jack Mormon, it is the reading found in the vast majority of all remaining Greek manuscripts that we have today, including the uncial copies D, E, G, H, K, M, S, U, Gamma, Lambda, Pi, and Omega. It is found in the remaining copies of the Old Latin, the vast majority. I think I said the majority. The vast majority. The Old Latin in lowercase letters, UAR, B, C, D, E, FF2, J, G1, and R1. And that's in early manuscripts, and the authorized version, A Closer Look by Jack Mormon. It is also found in the Palestinian version, in some Coptic Bohairic copies, the Armenian and Ethiopic ancient versions, as well as the early Latin Vulgate of 385 and 415. It is also in Murdoch's 1852 and Lambs's 1933 translation of the Syriac Peshitta. They are also included in the Aramaic Bible in plain English, 2011, in Greek Bibles used all over the world by the Greek Orthodox churches, and are in the modern Hebrew Bibles as well. So I'm only just stating that. This is just a quotation. I think that's actually from Will Kinney's site, so I should have made that clear. So I'm not saying I agree 100% with all that. I'm just putting out some of the evidence there, and these will probably become talking points in the next few videos. As noted by many textual scholars, perhaps the reason it had disappeared from some copies was due to the nature of the text itself, that Jesus freely forgave a woman taken in the very act of adultery. So Augustine, who lived from 354 to 430 AD, wrote, "Some of little faith," and he says, "I suppose," so this is just a supposition, "I suppose from fear lest their wives should gain impunity in sin, removed from their manuscripts the Lord's act of indulgence to the adulteress." So although during the debate I basically just went the whole route of the lectern cycle, I said in video 1 that I would quote these things, and so basically I'm quoting Augustine, and so Augustine is saying that people were removing these things. So whether or not, because that's his supposition, he's just guessing. He's saying, I suppose it's because some wives felt like they could do whatever they want and just be forgiven, sort of thing, which is not actually what the story teaches at all, because Jesus kept the whole law. He wasn't a sinner, and he would have gladly have had her stoned if it was done in a proper and orthodox fashion. He wasn't a witness there, so it had to be done by the witnesses, and they all walked away and said, "Where are your witnesses?" And they're all gone, and so he couldn't actually do that. So, but what we see is Augustine basically says that it's missing in the manuscript. So if he's saying it's missing, then it has to have been in manuscripts that he had at that time. So we're looking. He lived between 354 and 430. So let's look at Jerome. He was obviously the translator of the Vulgate. From 340 to 420, the translator of the Latin Bible, called the Vulgate, said this about the Pericope de Adultera. In the Gospel according to John, in many manuscripts, both Greek and Latin, is found the story of the adulterous woman. So he says it's in many manuscripts of both Greek and Latin. And so that's what I was saying in the debate. We've got to take into consideration what these guys are saying here. So Augustine's saying that there's been an omission, and he has a bit of a guess as to why. And then we have Jerome. He's saying, actually, this story is in many manuscripts. So he doesn't say in all, though. So both of these guys are admitting that it's been taken out. And as I talk about in the actual debate, these were taken out because of the lectern cycle, because it's such an abrupt story. Like I was explaining, in a Christmas story, you want to talk about Jesus and the wise man and the shepherds. You don't want to talk about any other story in the middle of that. A woman, healed of an issue of blood, or a leper healed, or something. You don't want to talk about that sort of stuff. It's like, let's just keep it Christmas, And so during the feast of, or during the lectern cycle, when they talked about Pentecost, they read through John chapter 7 and John chapter 8, and this story of a woman caught in adultery is thrown right in the middle there. And I think me and Stephen are both on the same page, where we both agree that it's an abrupt story, but this is not rare. Jesus was often interrupted abruptly by certain things. And so, and there's nothing wrong with just wanting to talk about that story. And so what they did is they put marginal notes saying, don't read this story at the during the time when we're talking about Pentecost. Just read it later, or skip down 12 verses and just continue reading, and we'll read this another time when we're dealing with that issue. So that's what the marginal notes were there for. Even Bruce Metzger mistook these marginal notes as omission notes, and so we know now that they're because of an early lectern cycle. And so they were, later scribes thought, I've just got to skip this bit, and they left it out, or they'd put it at the back of the book and all this sort of thing. And so it caused confusion. But as mentioned, 85% of the manuscript evidence point to it having it in there. Now, another thing is, just while it's on my mind, is Stephen was saying, you're appealing to the majority here. It's like 85% of this, or, the vast majority of manuscripts back up, the last 12 verses of Mark. The reason that I'm appealing to the authority is because that seems to be the default that critical text guys use. And so, we will freely admit, that there are some readings in the Greek transmission, and especially someone like me, I'm not tied to the Westminster Confession of Faith and things like that, which I know I'm discussing with a lot of people, and especially on the Confessional Bibliology page, and also on the Textus Receptus Academy page. We're talking about, Ruckman, and talking about James Whitey, because, Ruckman's saying, the English corrects the Greek, and whether he really said that or not, we're debating that. But then we're saying James White is saying that the Greek Septuagint can correct the Hebrew. Is he practicing, the Ruckmanism that he comes against? But there is the issue of, were certain Latin readings favoured? They might be found in Greek, but were they favoured just because, they're in Latin? I mean, the Comma Johanneum, it's in 95% of all the Latin manuscripts, and so it's like, well, it's in there, It's not in that many Greek manuscripts, but it's like, why would we favour that? Well, probably because it's in the Latin, and so it's interesting. And some people have the whole thing where the TR is compiled from Greek and Latin and early church writings. And so I think these are very important things to discuss and between TR people. But the problem is when we're talking to critical text guys, oftentimes they will take a majority text approach. So say when we look at Luke chapter 2 verse, I think it's 22, when it talks about their purification or her purification. We just go with what the King James says is, her purification, basically because that's what the Old Testament says. No one else needed to be purified. It's pretty basic. And so it's obviously an error in the majority text. But then people are like, you're not following the majority text. It's like, but we don't have to. And then you sort of get pushed in the corner where you become a majority text advocate. And it's like, no, we follow an eclectic text. The TR is an eclectic text, just like the critical text is. There are some readings that have slim manuscript evidence in the Greek, in the, take the last 12 verses of Mark, being deleted. That's only because of 2 Greek manuscripts. 1,500 manuscripts are on our side. So I think the thing is, some of the TR guys, some of the early TR guys, especially from the Dean Burgon Society, many times would default to a majority text argument because even the fact that it's the Dean Burgon Society, Dean Burgon basically started the majority text movement. And so him and Miller and Hoskier and Scrivener and a few other guys of that era, they planted all the seeds for the majority text movement. And they weren't, in a sense, just defending the text of Receptus. They were defending the traditional text. So it's different to the TR. So some people think the traditional text that they were talking about is the TR. It's not. And so that's where there can be confusion. But at the end of the day, we're not going for the majority text. And there can be confusion about that too, because the majority text, the text of Receptus used to be called the majority text. It used to be called the Greek Vulgate. There were many names for the TR. But in the 1980s, they printed an edition of the majority text, which wasn't the Textus Receptus. And so this caused confusion where people were saying, so is the Textus Receptus based on the majority text, or is it a majority text thing? And people were like, yeah, it is, because older writings said it was, but then it created an anachronism. Now it's changed. It's a bit like if I said, I believe the gospel message in the 1970s and 1980s and 1990s, the Message Bible comes out. It's like, do you follow the Message Bible? It's like, no, it's been redefined. And so the majority text has been redefined. It used to mean the TR in older writings. And so this is something that James White, he knows this, but he continually brings this up and says, they say they follow the majority text, but they, it departs 1,800 times from the majority text. And we know that. We've gone through that. Jack Mormon's written, when the TR departs from majority text. D.A. Waite's gone at length through debates and sermons and all sorts of things, talking about these issues. And so when Stephen says, you're appealing to the majority here, well, most of the time it's just that's the platform that we're supposed to battle on. But actually, when it comes down to it, there are some readings, like Revelation 16:5, where it's actually the internal evidence that proves it's a nomen sacrum that overrides everything. And when you say, look at Luke chapter 2, verse 22, the fact that the Old Testament says that Mary needed to be purified, no one else, that sort of overrides, it's not the days of their purification, it's days of her purification. And that overrides everything. And so just as homoioutheton at times overrides a majority reading, we flow with that. We go with, if something is ridiculous in its grammar, like what I mentioned in the debate about, was it 1 Timothy 3:16? God was manifest in the flesh, where the critical text has who appeared in a body. And it creates a massive grammatical blunder. And so we look at those things and say, well, let's not have that mistake. Obviously there's something wrong here. And so And those things were sorted out 400 years ago, 500, nearly 500 years ago. So, anyway, I'm going to continue to read these quotes. So we've read Augustine, we've read Jerome. So let's just look at some early versions, because I just want to bring that up. So this is from James Snap's article. The absence of John, chapter 5, verse 53 to 8:11 in some ancient versions, including not only Coptic dialects, but also the Ethiopic, Gothic, and Peshitta versions, is another important piece of evidence against the genuineness of the passage. However, on the premise that the passage was lost in Egypt in the 100s, and that the resultant omission had a large impact on the transmission of the text of the Gospel of John, is not very surprising. Granting that some versions of the Gospels produced in the 200s to 400s do not include the story about the adulteress, other versions, specifically 3 Old Latin transmission lines, the Vulgate, the Palestinian Aramaic, and copies of the Harklian Syriac, include the story. And so one of the things that's mentioned is the capitula. I'll just read what James Snap says about that, and then we'll continue on with the video. It is not unusual to find in ancient gospel manuscripts book divisions, often marked by chapter numbers, chapter titles, and sometimes brief chapter summaries. These divisions are different than the Eusebian canons and sections which he describes elsewhere. Latin copies contain a variety of chapter lists or capitula and chapter summaries or briefs. The terms are practically interchangeable. One of the earliest examples of Latin capitula is Codex Valdensis, produced in 546, in which the Vulgate Gospels text was formatted to correspond to an exemplar which Bishop Victor of Capua thought might have been a Latin version of the Diatessaron made by Tatian around 172. The chapter numbers and lists from Victor's lost exemplar were preserved in Codex Valdensis, and they include a chapter summary. So it talks about the it having the Pericope Adulterae there. So, that can be traced back to, or it says here, to 172. So I think in the video I mentioned about 150. So I was just sort of shooting from the hip there, but I was about 22 years out. So anyway, I'm going to go back to the video. So I just thought I'd read some of the early church writers and what they say. And so let's just continue. And I think I've got a few questions here that come up. Actually, we deal with Revelation 16:5 again.
Okay, so I can respond to the Pericope Adulterae
Sure.
issues there. Cool. And so just a few things, like there are conjectures in the critical text, like say in 2 Peter chapter 3 verse 10, that basically say the opposite thing to all the Greek manuscripts. And so it's a bit like the pot calling the kettle black when critical text advocates hold TR and King James people accountable for having a conjectural emendation in Revelation 16:5 when they do it themselves, and in something that completely changes the meaning from something, it's actually the word not. And so if you, Jeff Riddle's written quite a lot about that, and so I recommend that you look that up. Concerning P75, P66...
So just on that issue, when that was brought up by Jeff Riddle, because Jeff Riddle's written quite extensively about that, when he brought that up with Peter Gurry just goes, well, the guys at Tyndale House don't do that, and so just go with their reading. And so this is sort of what James White did when he did his hour-long expose about my Twitter feed on this issue. When I sort of mentioned that, I said, you're worried about this conjectural emendation and saying, basically in his book he says we're not really Christians, we don't desire truth, we're deceived, and he says some really harsh things. And so we just turn it around and say, but James, the critical text does the same thing. And he's like, well, I don't follow those. And so a lot of people were actually shocked when he said that. He's like, I don't follow those readings. And I think people had started to realise that there's massive holes in the National Allen 28th edition, and things that they hadn't thought about. I mean, I guess some people had thought about it, but that they weren't worried about the ramifications. But when it hits the road with someone like James White, he's like, well, I don't follow those readings. And so it's like, okay, so this Bible that you're advocating, he mightn't follow those readings, but are you going to be just as critical to these guys and say, hey, you guys are doing what Beezer did, you guys are just pulling words out of the air. I want the Bible that John wrote, not just what the Nestle Allen guys were. No, he'd never go that far. But when it's a TR thing, you're a Mormon, you're a Jehovah's Witness, you're a Muslim, And so, but he won't say that about these other guys. He'll just say, I don't follow that, So I just sort of point that out. And, sorry to Stephen for always defaulting back to what James White said. I've spent many years going through basically countering what James White said about me online. So oftentimes I do default back to those things. Sorry about that. I know that you're not saying that. But I just sort of sometimes I have to bring this up for the audience.
And even Alexandrinus, we're not sure what's on the last page of those three documents. In a sense, where actually I should rephrase that. P75 and P76. We don't know what's on the last page. That the Pericope Adulterae could have been moved to the end of that book. We just don't have the last page of both of those manuscripts. And so we know that the early church fathers, yes, they mention it, but it's what they say about it, that it's in many Greek copies and many Latin copies. So that's mentioned early. And we also look at the Capitula, the Latin Capitula, which basically says that the Pericope Adulterae was there in the probably about 250, and so when we put the writings of the early church fathers together and we examine what they were saying about it, they were saying it's around, it's here, but then we're only dealing with fragmentary pieces of information from one location just because of the weather, because it was dry in Egypt. We're like, okay, we're going to favour these manuscripts. Everywhere else, there was lots of rain, lots of mould, lots of, problems and issues, and manuscripts faded away. And so we're only dealing with a small amount of manuscripts in a small location. And so, it's just one more thing, just regarding Revelation 16:5 being based upon no manuscripts. I believe that once someone understands the Triadic Declaration, that it is an expansion of the name of Jehovah, that it is a noun phrase, that actually all the manuscripts say the one who was and is and shall be. All the manuscripts say that. A bit like if you were reading through, say, Matthew chapter 1, it might say the name Jesus in a nomina sacra form. And so you don't say, it doesn't say Jesus. You say, no, it says Jesus. It's just only two letters are involved. Once you understand that this is a noun phrase, that it is the most holy name in the whole entire New Testament, then you can understand why they put holy upon it and why that is a form of nomina sacra, but usually that's a form in the Old Testament.
Well, let me say this, Nick, about 2 Peter 3:10. I don't agree with the reading in the Nestle Allen 28th edition. In fact, there's a lot of guys on the critical text side, like Elijah Hickson and others, who have taken issue with the insertion that you're talking about, because it's primarily based on a Coptic manuscript that's very old. But not everybody in the critical text position. In fact, what you're stating is actually from the Nestle Allen 28th edition. But if you look at the Tyndale House text, like where Elijah works in England, it does not have that reading as the Nestle Allen 28th. So there are critical.
So, I mean, to me, this is sort of like, Yeah, because I've been dealing with these issues for years and years and years, and obviously there's some issues that I'm more up to speed on than others. But when it comes to Tyndale House, that just came out. It's like, oh, someone else has done a Greek Bible, but now that's the go-to one, and the one that everyone was defending, just a few years back. The 28th edition was the 27th edition before 2013. We're not defending that anymore, and it's like, okay. And so when we point out holes in the Tyndale House, is there going to be some other thing that we run to? Which other edition? Is it going to be the SBL edition, or is there a definitive Greek Bible out there? So we're saying we have the TR and we got the King James. That's why I was asking you earlier. Where's the Bible? Where's the Bible that people are saying that they have? And the thing is, a lot of the information in these Bibles isn't changing because of newfound manuscripts or whatever. It's basically changing because of the opinions of the people working on these Greek editions. And so, obviously the Nestle Island, it's started off with Nestle, went through Aylands, United Bible Societies, etc. And now you got Tyndale House, and so they've got their own biases. They've got their own texts that they like, and the Nestle Island don't like, and so they're favouring certain things, and it's like they're both looking at the same evidence and coming up with different things, and this is the problem. It's like, where's the definitive Greek text? Now you just got to, we're pointing out errors in the Nestle Island text. It's like, oh, well, look at this other text. And so, if they just create a smorgasbord of Greek text, it sort of befuddles people, and they're like, oh, yeah, I guess I can go to that one and eat from that. It's this, we've seen that with translations. I mean, even just in, say, the ESV has changed that many times over the years. It's like different Bibles. But that's just one edition of one English Bible out of many, many, many different English editions. And so, to me, this is just bringing massive confusion. And so is it just on the conjectural emendations that you reject the Nestle Island text, or are you creating your own text? Who do you go to find out this authoritative information about which Word of God you go to? Do you go to Bruce Metzger? Do you go to Bart Ehrman? Do you go to Dan Wallace? Do you go to James White? Do you go to Munster? Do you go to Tyndale? Who's got the good oil on this? Which guru do we go to find out the words of our God? Can we ever know this? Will the CBGM answer this for us? I don't think it will. I think it will create a totally different text. Then we'll have another dish in the smorgasbord. It's like, okay, we've got the 28 editions of the Nestle Island, and we've got 10 editions of the Tyndale House, and we've also got the CBGM, which has all these other things, and we've also got we'll just have this smorgasbord, and that's sort of what they want us to do. That's a lot of the reason why they have the notes at the bottom of the page. In the apparatus is so you can choose your own ending. It's a bit like the old choose your own adventure stories. You read through and it's like, oh, I want to go this direction, and so you read that, and it has a whole bunch of different endings, and so we can choose our own Bible. If we don't like a story, it's like, I don't like that story. I'm going to read this. And many times preachers are told not to preach on texts that have variants in them. And so what that does, people aren't preaching these texts. They're just skipping over them. And so we see that with big name preachers, John MacArthur and Piper and others, and I really have enjoyed what Jeff Riddle said about those issues as well. So, but we'll just continue on here.
Text people that do not agree with 2 Peter 3:10 and the reading that's there. I understand why they did it, just like I understand why Beza did what he did, but I don't agree with it. So just to be clear, I don't agree with the reading in the Nestle Island 28th and 2 Peter 3.
So when we have, say, Peter Gurry, he gets on, a program a bit like this, and then we have James Snap, and we have two totally different. We have a majority text. I don't know anyone who believes exactly like James Snap, so he has his own text. I remember when he brought it out on Facebook maybe about 8 years ago, and I was reading through some of the Greek that he had there. And so he has sort of like a majority text sort of thing. And then, say, Peter Gurry, he's like, well, just go to the Tyndale House guy. So he has sort of like his own mix of like, Nessa Allen 28. If you don't like that, go to the Tyndale House. And so that's sort of what Stephen's saying. And so it's like everyone can have their own little Bible. They're making up their own Bible along the way. And sort of, it depends on who you listen to. If you listen to Dan Wallace, he'll say this verse should be in there, and you listen to a bit of James White, he'll say, "No, don't. Father, forgive them. They know not what they do. That shouldn't be in there," and all this stuff, even though it's in the vast majority of manuscripts. But anyway, we'll continue.
Also, you talk about many copies. I'm assuming you're referring to Jerome's statement. With that being said, were you referring to what Jerome said? He said there were many copies. Okay, well, let me ask you this.
Many Greek and Latin, yeah.
Yeah, would you agree then with his statement when he got to the portion of the long ending of Mark where he said almost none of the manuscripts had the long ending of Mark? If we're going to be consistent with Jerome's quote, you would have to accept the pericope adulterae on his statement, because he said many have the PA, but he also said, along with Eusebius, almost none of the ones that he had in the West, Eusebius had in the East, had the long ending of Mark. So you would have to reject the long ending of Mark and accept the pericope of Jerome's statement, which I would actually say there's far more evidence for the long ending of Mark than there is for the pericope. So I think when we quote those guys, they can't be our final decision. We need to take heed to what they say. But if we go off of Jerome's statement, we have to accept the PA and reject the long ending of Mark. Also, the oldest witness of the story of the woman caught in adultery is actually not a manuscript witness. It's a quote of Eusebius from a church father named Papias, which I'm sure you're familiar with. He quotes him in his history of the church. What Papias said is astonishing, because Papias knew, or possibly knew, of the apostle John himself, if not John through Polycarp or one of the disciples. When he was citing, Eusebius was citing Papias, he was going through primarily actually Matthew's gospel in that section. And he actually said Matthew was written originally in Hebrew, according to Papias, not even in Greek. And then he was explaining that there were citations from Papias of the first epistle of John, and also Peter, 1 Peter. And then he makes this additional, and there were some other statements, and then he quotes Papias on, there was a story of this woman caught in many sins, which is interesting. Adultery is not mentioned. Brought before the Lord as found in the Gospel of the Hebrews. Now, if Papias knew John, or knew of John very closely within a couple of years, and he knew that was in John's Gospel, Papias had no problem writing about John's Gospel and other places. Why in the world would he leave the most important Gospel that he would have been most familiar with between Luke, Matthew, and Mark, and go off to a gospel that was primarily read by Jewish Christians in Egypt? The gospel of the Hebrews was more of a gospel for the Christians in Egypt. He was closer to where John was in Ephesus. And yet he's quoting it from a gospel that primarily made its way into Egypt, not John's own gospel. So our first century witness of the pericope does not credit this story to John. He credits it to the Gospel of the Hebrews. To me, that is telling. And Eusebius didn't even comment on it. He just kind of let it go. Because if Eusebius knew about it, why didn't Eusebius also chime in and say, kind of like the way John has it, it's a lesser. And what I proved in my mind the best I could, that seems the most logical explanation, is you have a partial story from Papias and a very full story from Didascalia, a Syrian writing, that has one half of the story, or really 3/4 of the story, mixed with 3/4 or 1/4 of the story, and it kind of conflated into one with a few additives. Even Maurice Robinson recognized that there is no majority. You're saying, well, there's over 1,000 manuscripts that support it, 85%. But even Maurice Robinson broke that statistic down for us. And he used von Soden's work, who said there's 7 different stream readings in this one story. That is incredible. That can't be said about any other passage. Maurice Robinson condensed it to 3 with the letter mu in Greek, M5, M6, M7. In fact, if you pull up a Pierpont and Robinson majority text, he actually gives you the M6, M7, M5 all through the readings to show you where the streams are. So it's really more like 31%, I think 27 and 29. It's really not as majority as everybody wants to make it out to be. It is in the majority of Byzantine manuscripts, but not even the Byzantine streams can agree on wording. And I showed and demonstrated there are places that are not Johannine at all. There's words in the Greek that...
So, with what Stephen's saying there, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go, in my next video, I'm going to read through the Gospel of the Hebrews. We're going to look at what Papias said. We're going to look at everything that Stephen's talking about here. And we'll also read through some of his article, which is pretty much exactly what he's quoting here, and we'll look at the Mu 5, Mu 6, Mu 7 issue of Maurice Robinson, and also the from Mu 1 to Mu 7 issue of Caspar Rene Gregory. We'll look at those things. So these are quite complicated issues, but what I'll try to do is explain them, make them easy for you to follow and understand. And but I sort of feel like Stephen's saying all this stuff, and I've gone through and quoted a few things to sort of square up where I was heading with that. But what I'll do the next time is I'll try to square up this issue that Stephen's talking about, so that we can thoroughly understand exactly what he's getting at and how he came to that position. So we just got Henry Peters. Hey Henry, how you doing, mate? What do you mean when you say they put it upon it? Over the top of the word or on the word? And so I guess the correct exact word would be substituted. So usually with nomina sacra, you have said the name of Jesus. It might be Jesus. So you have the iota and the sigma. So it looks like a capital I and a capital C, and so all the letters in between are taken out. And so when we're talking about the word holy or sacred, or because it was a noun phrase, because it involved so many words, the last part of that, which was distinctive from the other four triadic declarations, the last part of that being esomenos, it's too holy. It's like, okay, who was and is to come, that's getting there, but who was and is and shall be, it's like, well, hang on, you're saying the name of Jehovah here. And so this was usually substituted in the Old Testament, and so sometimes in translation it was changed. Sometimes there are scripts where they would keep it the way it was. Sometimes they would substitute it with Adonai. If you listen to a Hebrew audio Bible of the Old Testament, a spoken word Old Testament, many times they'll use the name Adonai or Elohim or Hashem, which means the name, instead of Jehovah. And so yeah, I guess in a way sometimes I'm saying, they put the name on top of it. It's sort of like to cover it up. To me, it's almost like putting a sticker over the last word, saying it's too holy. And that was actually going to be a picture for the book, was going to be like the actual writing in, like, say, Scrivener or even Beezer, and then like a thumb putting a sticker with holy over the top of Esomenos. It's just too holy to say. And so many Jewish scribes were obsessed with the name of Jehovah, and so many times they had influence in the early church of how to say things and all the rest of it. And so hopefully that clears it up in a sense of, they put it over it. That's a picture I have in my mind. But I guess the proper word is they substituted holy. And so, Okay, but both words were not there, right? In a sense of meaning both words, like, okay, yeah, I'm not really understanding that, but if you articulate it a little bit easier for me to follow, I'll try to answer that. I'll just let Stephen keep chatting, and then I'll get back to that.
John used, that he does not use in 1 John, 2 John, 3 John, or Revelation, or in the rest of the gospel, that are not his language, especially when Jesus was writing on the ground. And that you can actually find more Lucan terms in that than you can anywhere else. And the lectionaries, and I want to ask you this, you're mentioning the lectionaries in the asterisks, which, by the way, I think they're very important. I think they're very, very important. In fact, the book To Cast the First Stone by Nust and Wasserman did an excellent job of explaining that. But they also concluded that that no decision should be made on this passage on the basis of lectionaries. They concluded that, and they did a thorough job. They even stated at the end that their position was that this was inserted later. And you'd have to admit, Nick, that lectionaries was a Byzantine tradition that started in Constantinople. That wasn't something that's been going on from the beginning of time. And the oldest lectionaries that we have are 4th century at best, late 4th century, and they're fragmented. And the first ones that really actually have the story in it really are not even complete or partial. And you stated it's out of place for them to read it. You compared it to a Christmas story. Like, well, they would skip over it because who wants to interrupt the Christmas story with a woman caught in adultery? That's my point. That story's out of place. It interrupts a thought. It's not following a train of thought. John's statement was interrupted by this story. And we're saying, well, the lectionaries are the explanation. But the lectionaries are a Byzantine tradition that came later.
And so I guess in a way, I know when we're debating like this, Stephen probably didn't expect for me to just go the whole route of the James Snap, Maurice Robinson concept. And so when we're looking at the lectionaries, I mean, James Snap describes the whole concept of this quite clearly in his book. And so I would just encourage anyone who's doubting that just to read James Snap's book. I mean, I could sum it up or whatever here, and I try to in the debate. But you're best just to go to that book yourself. If you go to the Facebook page, NT Textual Criticism, I think it is, you will find it. Or even if you just typed in James Snap Facebook, you'd probably get there. But he offers it for free as a download there, or it's 99 cents from Amazon. You can download that. And so it's filled with really good information. And so I encourage anyone to read through that and to get a good understanding of James Snap's book. And then what you'll see here, things that are said like, the lectionaries, they came later and all that. James Snap deals with all that. And so it's sort of like, just read the book, go through it. I sort of explain it a little bit, that it's, that, what was it, Dean John William Burgon, he talks about it, and Caspar Rene Gregory and a few other people that James Snap quotes. Okay, so I'm just going to read this quotation from Henry Peters. So he's got, the manuscripts don't have the word shalt be. It's not shalt be with wholly scribbled over it, right? That would seem to remove all doubt for everyone. Manuscripts don't have the word shalt be. It's not shall be with wholly scribbled over. Well, see, no, it's not like shall be, and you can sort of, see underneath, like they've just rubbed it out or something like that. So basically, the manuscripts, the vast majority of manuscripts, or all of the Greek manuscripts, say the one who was and is and, or the one which art and wast and shalt be, and shalt be, it just says wholly. And so that's, so it's not like that it's been erased. But what we can see from Latin, so say I think it's Beatus of Libana. He has 31 editions still in existence of his work, which has the reading, the one who was and is and shall be, or art and wast and shall be, in the Latin. And some of these ones actually have the Triadic Declaration, and then later it'll say holy. So it will say basically the one who is and was and shall be and holy, or holy just after it. So, but there's a lot of inconsistency with it. Sometimes it's the one who is and was and holy. Sometimes it's who is and was and shall be holy. And so sometimes it's actually worded, you will be holy. You know, sort of, you're going to be holy later on or something, or and so there's quite a lot of confusion around that. And so, hopefully that clears it up. If there's any more questions, I'm free to answer any of them. So I'll just let Stephen continue.
And Stephen, let's give Nick a few minutes to respond to some of that, and then we're going to have to transition over to Revelation. But sure. I'll give Nick a couple minutes to respond to some of that. Sorry to interrupt you there.
Yeah, because it's getting a little bit long, and so actually even just trying to remember what was first said is becoming difficult. But so to say, I've got to basically accept what Jerome said about Mark. Well, this is one of the things that I disagree with a lot of critical text folks and their scholarship, is say even Elijah Hickson recently did an article on 1 John 5:7, and he looked at just the Greek manuscripts, and that's fine, and TR, King James people will say, yeah, there's slim amount of Greek evidence for that in the manuscripts. But when we look at the early church writings, when we look at the Latin, so the three closed class of witnesses, we see that it's in pretty much 95 to 98% of the Latin. So it's so well attested in the Latin that that just never gets mentioned. And this is one of the things which, say, the Jerome comment about the last 12 verses of Mark, I personally would say, okay, well, Jerome, perhaps that was his experience, but it's abnormal compared to what we're seeing. And so in a sense where I don't think that Jerome was lying about that, but at the end of the day, Jerome did put in those 12 verses into his edition. And so he believed that they were authentic. And so I believe that speaks volumes there. When he does say it's in the Greek and it's in the Latin, they're just things that we look at and we examine as part of the evidence, not just something that just completely overrides all the other evidence. We've got to weigh all the evidence. And this is one of the things which, like I said, on the issue of the Comma Johanneum, we've got to look at everything. We're people are just like the Greek. When you look at Erasmus, he did a Latin translation and then he did a Greek translation. He was an expert in Latin. He was an expert in Greek. All the Textus Receptus major editions during around the time of the King James translators were usually diglots. Erasmus's one was, Beza's one was. So you had the Greek on one side and the Latin on the other, and they were looking at Latin, they were looking at Greek, and they were looking at all the evidence. And so when it comes to the vocabulary, I just look at, say, Zane Hodges and Arthur Farstead. In 1982, they wrote in their book, The Greek New Testament According to the Majority Text, basically that they, from their scholarly perspective, John wrote it. And so I understand that in your article you've gone in depth, you've got, a lot of Greek words showing that they're from Luke, showing that they're from other places. And to me, it's like I haven't had the time to actually go through and check every one of them. Sure. But if I was just to appeal to scholarship, and if I was to look at these guys, who are not King James guys, these are just scholars, and I don't think the majority text guys have a huge barrow to push. They would pretty much go either way, whichever way the evidence points. even though I believe that they're flawed in their methodology, they clearly state that there's no compelling reason to doubt that the story is originally Johannine, despite the prevailing contrary opinion. And then they have many examples in that book about why John wrote it. And so I guess, in a way, to go through the vocabulary, that there's people on both sides saying very convincing things. And to me, that's just to me, the main issue is the lectin cycle. So now you were saying that the story was sort of like interrupted, and so we got Jesus, he's teaching, then there's this woman adultery story. I think we do see that quite a lot in the Gospels. We see like the woman with the issue of blood. We might be talking about that, and we don't really want to talk about that particular issue on a certain day, and so the lectin guys, they were like, okay, move this, read this later. But what we see, one of the reasons why we believe it is part of the lectin cycle is because of where it was moved to. And so it was moved to the reading for October the 8th, if I recall correctly, which is the day where they talk about the woman caught in adultery in the lectin cycle. And so that's why in some manuscripts it's found at Luke. Other times it's found in John chapter 7, verse 36, which is actually at the beginning of the 86th portion of the lectionary. So people were told to put it back in the 86th section, and they were putting it right back at the beginning of the section or right at the end of the section. And so you can see they were trying to put it back into that section. And so to me, that speaks of the lectionary cycle. I guess in a way, because the Pericope Adulterae is your main topic, you've written an article on it, and I'm trying to debunk you. I have leaned heavily upon James Snap's argument.
Sure.
And so I think that's one of the things that probably comes out pretty clear in the debate is, I know quite a fair bit about Revelation 16:5, and we'll talk about it until the cows come home, but when it comes to the last 12 verses of, the Pericope Adulterae, I actually, in all honesty, in my scholarship, I've usually avoided these type of topics because at the end of the day, every time I've looked into, whether something should be genuinely in the Bible or not, I've usually just totally convinced myself. I've gone through, looked at manuscripts, and I might be building a page on my website, and I'm just like, man, there's stacks of evidence for this. This is the slam dunk. And so oftentimes I will just default to the TR's correct. It's a bit like, once with the evolution creation debate, you read 50 articles about creationism, and they make evolution look so silly. You sort of just default to the next article that comes out is going to be correct. You're reading Creation Science magazine or whatever, or Answers in Genesis, and you're just going through it going, yep, I agree, And so, in a sense where I guess I've more focused on trying to look at the text receptors, the King James Version, and also trying to do translations based upon the TR. And so, because it's sort of like we could argue about this stuff until the cows come home, but at the end of the day, there are people who need a Bible, people who need a good, accurate TR Bible all around the world. And so many times during my life, I've travelled overseas, and you've been in Pakistan, been in Papua New Guinea, been in many different places, and seen the need for good, accurate, solid Bibles based upon the TR, and we're working towards those things. And so that's been where most of my energy is, because I saw lots of people online directing all of their energy towards answering these type of questions. And to me, it's just like, are you guys serious? It's like, we know that this is the word of God. Why, or in a way, I'm like, well, someone else is fighting that battle. But I guess, when it came to Revelation 16:5, it's a battle that hardly anyone's really fighting. But I was invited to the debate to debate about both these topics. So you can probably see that I've leaned upon scholarship, the scholarship of James Snap Jr., quite heavily. And so that's why here I just admit and say, well, that's obviously your thing. The Pericope Adulterae, my thing is Revelation 16:5. And so that's why I said what I said. And so I just want to be honest about that and not pretend that, that's been my focus for the last 15 years. It's like, it's pretty much, I've gone through these issues, read stuff. I've probably actually read quite a fair bit about it, because I do go through things like I go through pretty much everything of Jeff Riddle, everything of D.A. Waite, a lot of his older stuff, and some of it I've listened to 20 times. Some of his stuff is so good, I'll just listen to it over and over and over and just still get things out of it. And also you're listening to, contras. You listen to Dan Wallace, you listen to James White, so then you're searching for people who are, making a defence of the position and reading lots of articles and things like that. So I guess in a way I do know about it, but it's not something that Pericope Adulterae is not something that I sit up late at night thinking about until recently. So anyway, I'll continue here. Actually, Henry Peters has written, thanks, that was confusing for me, but it is the way that I thought. Cool. That's right, we believe the virgin birth in spite of evidence. The same way we believe preservation. It's a good thing. Yeah, and that's one of the things, we believe what the Bible says about itself. We have a biblical position that God has preserved his word to us. And I can know where the words of God are right now. And all I have to do is just open a book or dig a little bit, and I've got the words of God. Where many of these guys they're scrambling for the words of God. They're looking for them everywhere, and it's like, the sheep hear the voice of the shepherd. It's we either believe what God says about himself and his word in the Bible, or we don't. And I do. I believe every word of Jesus, every word that's written in the Bible. But I'm just going to continue here. But yeah, that's a good point, because there's certain things. We believe in a miracle working God, that God spoke everything into existence, that Jesus was risen from the dead, that the virgin birth happened, that we believe all this stuff, and then we don't believe that God can preserve his word to us today, that there's like a smorgasbord. And one of the things that I often say to people, and it was actually brought up by I think it was Dane Johansson, the Agros guys. They did a video the other day. They're another group that are interesting to listen to. And they said it's sort of like you're in a big arena and this big bulldozer just brings in a whole bunch of Bibles, whole bunch of books, and just dumps it there and says, there's the word of God in there somewhere. And you're sort of like, where? Well, it's in there somewhere. And I often liken it to, a Scrabble box. You play Scrabble. And the words are there somewhere. The words of the English dictionary are all there somewhere. It's like... can you be more specific? Oh, no, just go to the Tyndale house. No, just go to the NA28. Or, no, just go here and there. And it's like, or oftentimes that's just the surface level stuff that they'll admit to. When you read the preface to a lot of these Bibles, or even the Nestle Allen edition or whatever, like it was admitted that they think this conjectural inundation goes back to the Coptic. Well, in a sec, we'll look at a bit of an article by Elijah Hickson, but I'm not going to deal with that issue. But the first half of the issue is to deal with that, and the second half is to do with Revelation 16:5. So we're going to have a look at that. But many times they're correcting the Hebrew with the LXX, or they're going back to Targums, or all sorts of things, and it's like, they're going all over the place looking for the Word of God. And so, this is one of the problems that we see. So anyway, I'll continue the debate.
And I would encourage anyone to read his book, which I think I have a picture of it on the screen here.
It's got about one more minute, Nick.
I'd actually deliberately put all my pictures backwards so that they would come out forwards, because I've noticed in debates and most of my live stuff that it doesn't work. But then I found the feature in the live feature that actually flips the screen, and so it's in the live thing here. And so, yeah, so I actually had it all backwards, but that's fine.
A fresh analysis, I don't know if that's backwards or forwards, or if you can even see it. A fresh analysis of John 7:53 to 8:11. And so James Snap basically goes through every single thing you can imagine about this issue. And I believe that once that book is read and understood, that we can't really get around the lectin cycle. So I mightn't be explaining it properly because as I mentioned earlier, most of my focus is on TR, King James issues and all the rest of it. But this issue, when I read Snap's material, I was thoroughly convinced, and I believe that that's the way that people should go in their scholarship.
And so when it comes down to these type of issues, dealing with the different TRs and King James Bible and how, and all that, to me that's just like, very surface level sort of stuff. But that's as deep as I really want to go. When we get to this issue, to me this is like, I've often said, it's like a canonical issue. It comes down to, okay, so I want to delete the book of Jude out of the Bible. Or I don't think 2 John should be there. It's nearly 12 verses. It's nearly as many words. And so when we're talking about the last 12 verses of Mark or the Pericope Adulterae, this becomes a canonical issue. And I really appreciate the light that's been brought upon that by guys like Robert Truelove and Jeff Riddle in their conference about how the words and canon they flow together. And oftentimes you'll find they're questioned together too. The words and the book's authorship and all that sort of stuff. But let's continue.
David, can I ask 2 quick questions of him?
Yeah, you can hit him with 2. We're going to
have
a kind of a short discussion on Revelation.
Really quick,
go ahead.
By the way, Snap does a great job. I actually like Snap's argument I actually learned a little bit from reading him on the asterisks, a lot more thorough. And he would admit not every one of the asterisks represents that. But here.
So I think just by that answer, I would say that Stephen hasn't actually read the book, but he's read his website, because he does talk about the asterisks. And there is a website out there that's like, it's got like 5 mirror sites, and it's just about the Pericope Adulterae, and it deals in depth with the asterisks and things like that, and exactly what they are and what they represent and things.
Here's my question. To cast the first stone by Nust and Wasserman, they did an explanation. They pointed to the fact that they're an important factor, but no decision on the story should be made off of the lectionaries. Do you agree or disagree with them?
I totally disagree. I believe that in the conference that they had in 2014, it was clear that Maurice Robinson presented basically the James Snap type argument.
Sure.
And it was very convincing. Now, I believe that Wasserman and Nust, I believe that their book is not thorough. I believe it's a popular book written mostly just for sales. I don't believe it's as thorough as something like James Snap's written. I think James Snap has written several articles critiquing the book and critiquing the authors. And so I've had a little bit of conversation with Wasserman, but yeah.
Let me ask you with that. Since the lectionaries are no earlier than late 4th century, they're not any older that we have, any older than the Byzantine manuscripts that we have, because they started because of Constantinople. It was a tradition that started in Constantinople. It was a Byzantine tradition. With that being said, I recognize the importance of that, but they're still not the older manuscripts that don't represent, like I said, P75, P66, Aleph, B, or even the oldest Byzantine manuscript like Codex A. Since those are no older than those kind of manuscripts, they don't represent the first couple hundred years of the reading. So though I think they're important, I don't think they prove that the story's original because of the patristic quotations of it being in the Gospel of the Hebrews rather than John, or that it's in Gospels like Didymus the Blind, stuff like that. I would reject it because they're no older than the late 4th century. That's just my position. I know we don't disagree. We need to move on to Revelation. So
Yeah, and
Can I just quickly answer that, just so we tidy that up?
Sure. You can do that, Nick. And then also, we wanted a little bit. Could you explain like the cycle, just a little bit about like for the dummies in the audience like me, explain exactly what that is, and then you can answer that, of course, and then we'll move on to Revelation.
So basically, every year they read through certain feast days, and so they didn't read through the whole entire New Testament. They just read certain passages on certain days. A bit like we might do at Easter, or say we read about the wise man and all that. We might read Matthew chapter 2, and then we flip over to Luke. And so these marks were put there to go, okay, now flip over to this story or that story. And so just like the woman the woman with the issue of blood, you might be reading through that and go, look, I don't really want to bring that up in this context. And so marks were put next to that, and early lecture marks were put into early manuscripts. And so that's just what I want to actually touch on right here, right now, that Dean John William Burgon, I'll just read a quote of his. I won't be one sec, I just had it up here. In the Dublin Review, speaking of Dean Burgon in 1872, they wrote, quote, Mr. Burgon indeed seems to assert that whenever a manuscript contains an admitted error, you are warranted in suspecting, in default or other explanation, that the lectionary system has been to blame, especially if the error is an omission. So what they're basically they're summarising Dean Burgon saying, well, he's always just saying that it's because of the lectionary, that's why things are omitted, because people read the marginal notes wrong and went, okay, well, apparently we've got to leave this out, instead of just skipping over it in the lectern reading. So a lectern is basically just a type of preaching. And so I'll read James Snap, and this is the last quote I'll make on this. So he summarises it, and this is in his book, The Fresh Analysis. So that's this one here. In the case at hand, I submit the following hypothesis. John 7:53 to 8:11 was in an exemplar used by copyists in Egypt in the mid-100s, having descended to it from an autograph. So they basically received the autograph in Egypt of the Gospels. By the mid-100s, the churches in Egypt already possessed a rudimentary lection cycle for their major annual festivals, Easter, Pentecost, Christmas, Annunciation Day, and Palm Sunday. Regarding the Gospels selection, assigned to be read on Sundays, the text critic Caspar René Gregory stated, it seems to me likely that at an extremely early date, the lessons were chosen for the Sundays. John Chrysostom, in the late 300s, refers to the assignment of specific passages for specific Sundays to be something established by previous generations. His contemporaries Epiphanius and Augustine likewise indicate their familiarity with reading cycles used in the churches. And of course, we see in the book of Acts, the Christian church observed the annual feast of Pentecost from its very beginning. And so basically what Snap's saying here is that it wasn't the full lectern cycle that came later, but this is just an early lectern cycle to do with certain feast days. And so it was the beginning, I guess the puppy feet of the later.
But the evidence of the woman caught in adultery cannot be traced any earlier than 5th, maybe later century. But that's again, I know we got to move on, but I would say the evidence does not prove that. David?
Okay. So Stephen put that little bit in, but I think I answered that thoroughly, because he was talking about, this lectionary cycle didn't really start until Constantinople and, the Byzantine era. And I'm like, well, actually, James Snap in his book, he deals with that. He talks about this early lectern cycle that wasn't the full lectern cycle, it was just the puppy feet of it. But yeah, I think I clearly answered that. And so I'm tempted just to keep going here, because I'm already most of the way through it, and anyone who's going to watch a video this long till now will probably, you can fast forward these things. It's like, I've had a lot of criticism my videos go too long, but it's like, you can always just go, okay, watch an hour one day and watch an hour the next or whatever. And so, but I think we deal with Revelation 16:5 next, and so I've got a little bit I want to discuss on that, and I've got it up on my computer and everything like that. So I don't want to just go, okay, we'll talk about it next week, and then I'll lose the train of thought. So that's really what I wanted to get to. So, but I will deal with Stephen's issues that he mentioned about the PA next video. So let's continue.
No, I think I hear both of your points there, and I do appreciate it, and I'd love to let you keep battling that out. But yes, we do need to move on to Revelation here. Because we let Nick lead on that one, and we got about maybe 6-7 minutes to discuss this, so this is going to be a lot briefer. But Stephen,
I hope we can extend this. Nick, you state often that there's 20 translatable differences between the King James Version's choices of Beza over Stephanus. Is that correct?
Yes, approximately.
Scrivener said there.
So, from what I heard there, because we've got lots of people talking, and I'm trying to think of what I'm saying next and all the rest of it, and so all I heard was 20 differences between Stephanus, Beza, and so to me, in my mind, I actually thought he meant Scrivener. Because a lot of people will just get these guys' names wrong, and so I'm like, oh, he actually meant Scrivener there. So I'm like, yeah, that's what I think. So what I thought he was talking about was on my website, there's a list of 191 issues or differences that Scrivener has between his text and basically the texts of Beza, in a sense where he deals with issues. Theodore Beza would spell a name a certain way. The authorized version translated it, say, a little bit differently, and so Scrivener would mention that and actually amend his Greek to word it according to how the authorized version guys had it. And so there's 190 issues. If you actually read the preface to any edition of the Textus Receptus done by the Trinitarian Bible Society, you can read that. You can read about that. And so I thought he was talking about that because on my site I'm going through those issues, and I know D.A. Waite. I think I explained this. D.A. Waite and Kirk DeVitro. These guys had done a scholarship on this before, so the 20 number sort of comes from those two guys, where I'm going through that slowly and realizing, that they're about right. I think I've gone through definitively through certain entire books and gone, no, there's no difference whatsoever. I can't, basically the rules that Bancroft used for translation that the King James guys followed, they many times override what Scrivener's talking about. So Scrivener will say the reading should be Ozios and not, or it should be Hosios and not Ozios. And so then he'll amend his Greek. And so it's just basically a smooth breathing or a rough breathing. But it's going to be Ozios either way. And so, Nazareth or Nazareth. Well, it's going to be translated as Nazareth in English. And so these are the type of things that we're dealing with. And so there's about 20 of substance that I can project from the scholarship that I'm doing, that there would be about 20, just on the ratio of what I've done so far. But that's about the number that D.A. Waite and Kirk DeVitro came up with. So the list that Stephen actually gave me was a 59, a list of 59 differences between Beza and Stephanus. And so this is a totally different list than the Appendix E, which is in the 1881, the back of the 1881 Greek edition of the Textus Receptus that Scrivener did. So basically the first edition of his TR. So let's just continue on here.
There's 59, so I'm curious where you got the number 20.
Scrivener says there's 190, actually.
No, I'm talking about the translatable ones. I'm talking about translatable.
Translatable, okay. Oh, that's interesting because
So I guess in a way, maybe Timothy Berg has mistaken what I've said in other videos or whatever, and so it's sort of like been, or maybe even Stephen thought that, and I guess maybe I've got to work out exactly how to word that, because I was even struggling, like, okay, it's the differences between Scrivener and Beezer and the authorized version, and it's like even a lot of those titles are quite complicated, and so perhaps it's my issue. Maybe I haven't made myself clear there, but we were talking past each other. We were talking about totally different things. But Stephen went through a list of those things. Timothy Berg went through it as well, and so I will eventually get to that, and I'll go through those issues and we'll deal with them. But we were talking past each other basically here.
I get my statistics. I'm actually slowly going through every time Scrivener mentions a change, and so that's on my website. If you type in 191 into the search bar, you'll find that article. But that's from the scholarship of D.A. Wade and also Kirk DeVitro. So I know Kirk's son is part of the King James only debate group, I think, so he might even have that article. And so they both came to the 20 number. So that's why I say around 20 translatable things.
I actually went through all 59. I actually got it right here. And after
I'd love to read it.
I transmitted and translated all 59. I actually found 60 in doing it. And one of them, Scrivener, miscited the very last one. And then Timothy Berg came behind me and edited it. I'd love to send that to you. I actually got a different statistic, and I even color coordinated and everything. I've got 49 translatable differences with 11 that should not be listed in that list. But I'll send that to you afterward. I was just really curious. Also,
so I guess in a way, Stephen's prepared this earlier, and this is a bit of a debate point. Like, look, you're wrong on this, so you're probably wrong on other things, sort of thing. And but we chatted about that later and realised we're both basically talking past each other. The 20 number doesn't relate to that, although it could in a roundabout way, and so I've got to go through that. And Stephen sent me all that, so but it's sort of got nothing really to do with Revelation 16:5 with Prickabay Adulterae, and so especially we got like 7 minutes to go, and it'll bring that up, and it's like. But I think we still go for like another, what's that? We still go for another 20 minutes, and so I'll let Stephen talk, and then
let's talk about this. You've mentioned in the past, and this hasn't come up, but I want you to speak on this. And I know, David, if you could please, by grace, extend some time on this. You've mentioned in the past that there's Ethiopic support outside of the Greek text. And earlier you mentioned, well, not everything's about the Greek. Well, I hope you give that same latitude to the Nestle-Null in 28. But I agree with you, but I think there should be Greek. You've made statements.
And so, that comes back to, from what I'm discovering, the Westminster Confession of Faith. But I'm open to being taught more about that, because from my understanding, I guess it's just the way that I've thought a lot of the time, is, there's Greek and there's Latin and there's the early church writers. So I've always seen that as like the closed class of witnesses. Not that, and obviously the Greek is more important, and the Latin, is basically showing what the Greek had, because it's translated from the Greek, and the early church writings, they're like a commentary on both. But I guess in a way, some people, if there's nothing in the Greek, they just totally write it off, even though it can be massively in the, like, say, Common Johanneum, massively in early church writings, and massively in the Latin. 95% of the Latin manuscripts all have the Common Johanneum. And so, because then what we're trusting in is that the Byzantine church had it all together and become an issue. But I guess I've got a lot more to learn about that topic. So let's just continue.
Statements about the Ethiopic or the Ge'ez language supporting this from the 1549. And you wrote that in your book, and I think you took a picture of Hoskier's citation. Is that correct?
Yeah, and Walton's polyglot.
Right. I'm going to actually pull that up for us, Nick. I'm going to try to share a screen once again. I might fail really badly, but I'm going to do that. Let's see how this goes. Y'all tell me if you can see it.
Yep.
All right, it's based on this statement up here, correct, Nick?
Yes.
Okay. Now, let me just say this, and you can chime in on this. This is a translation of the Ethiopic and the polyglot of Walton, correct?
Yes.
All right, and the man's name that did the translating and transmitting was Dudley Loftus. He was an Irishman who did the Geese language. And in a book called The Memoirs, the Life and Writings of Reverend Brian Walton, which is the polyglot, a man did this and said this about his work of Ethiopic transmitting and translating. He said the translator of it in the Latin conjectured, and he gives the word there, and he states how inconsistent this is, and basically says the Ethiopic translator must be illiterate and the translation novel when it comes to, and he compares the Syriac. And then Scrivener, who I know you appreciate a lot of Scrivener's work, and I do as well, said this about the translation as well. Walton's polyglot, the New Testament, was reprinted with many faults. An unusually bad Latin translation by Dudley Loftus, from which Mill and his successors derive various readings. So what I did is...
So just to make it clear, because Stephen said, I respect Scrivener and everything. Scrivener worked on the Westcott and Hort text. Scrivener was commissioned by Westcott and Hort to do an edition of the text of Receptus. And so oftentimes people think that Scrivener is actually an ally of the TR. Many times he is the driving force for the Westcott and Hort text. That's what I see throughout history. When you look, at his early writings, his introduction to textual criticism and things like that, he is attacking the TR. And so many of these guys attack the TR. And sure, they might come against some of what Westcott and Hort have said, which is very extreme. But I don't see Scrivener as a great ally or friend of the TR. I believe that he was actually an enemy, but it's sort of like anti-TR light. Yeah, and I also see Dean John William Burgon as being way less, but actually coming against the text of Receptus. When he went through the Gospel of Matthew, he found 14 changes that he would do to the text of Receptus, like say Matthew chapter 10, where it says, Jesus is talking to the disciples and he's telling them what to do, and he says, raise the dead, or he doesn't believe that should be in the Bible. So he has his own text, and he started the majority text movement. So that's why I don't, I believe these guys say a lot of good things, but I don't necessarily adhere to their conclusions and to their methodology. I believe that whole generation was infected by Enlightenment thinking, and I think that that caused a lot of problems. And sometimes they're the ones bringing the solution, but there's the 98% wholesome food and the 2% rat poison that's what kills the rat. And I think that there have been seeds planted in that era from Hoskia. Hoskia was an occultist. Hoskia, to find out about a certain manuscript, went to a medium, a spirit medium, to find out the provenance of a certain manuscript. It's like, and so people try to tie you to these people. You like Scrivener, and you like, no, I like the guys from the Reformation. But even then, people will just start tying you to someone who baptized babies and all this sort of stuff, and it's like, I don't like to be tied down to anyone else, but I do believe I have the true text. And so what we're looking at here is this Justus est Domine et rectus qui fiesti et eris. So et eris is basically the words that I was focusing on, which basically say is to come. And so and it says AETH, which is Ethiopic. And so what you got to understand is Turretin fan, or Francis Turretin on the internet, he said it doesn't say that. And James White said it doesn't say that. and so what I'm seeing is just an inconsistency with scholarship, where some people are saying one thing and some people are turning around and agreeing with me, but they're arguing something else, and it's like, and it's what I'll do. I'll let Stephen just talk as he tries to basically make the argument that the Ethiopic, the guy who translated the Ethiopic into the Latin didn't know what he was doing. It's perhaps that's true, but Erasmus didn't know what he was doing. Stephanus didn't know what he was doing. Beza didn't know what he was doing. King James guys didn't know what he was doing. King James was a gay guy and had all these boyfriends, and now we got this other guy. Because there's a bit of a defence of a reading of the TR, we got to he doesn't know what he's doing either, and it's just sort of like you just sort of end up. I don't know if I believe it. This is just the thing. There's so many anecdotes about these other people that when you go through them, it's like, hang on, no, King James wasn't homosexual. He had 8 children, and it's pretty obvious. And so then you're sort of left with this when this stuff comes up, it's like you're relying on this testimony of, he's saying, Nick, you respect Scrivener. It's like, well, I don't know. Scrivener was good and bad. He's like Samson. And so, do I trust what's written about this guy with the Ethiopic? I don't know. Who was this written by? Do you trust that 100%? Does he actually, in other parts of the book, come against readings that you would support? Because I'm pretty sure there's a lot of Ethiopic readings that actually come against the critical text as well. And so, are they good? Are they well translated or not? And so, and I know that the RO AETH reading is in the Nestle Island series of Bibles, and that means the Ethiopic text of the 1549 that was done in Rome. So that's basically the text that Walton had in his polyglot that's translated into Latin. So the reason why we're going into the Latin here is because most people can't read Ethiopic, let alone Ethiopic of 1500 or 1549. So it's been translated into Latin. So we're reading the Latin. So he's saying the Latin isn't done well, and it's like, and so, but let's look at what he says.
I got so tired of reading how bad the Latin was. I ended up going to find out from, I have a connection at the Smithsonian who connected me with one of the leading professionals in the world in the Ge'ez language, Dr. Natsnitzen, and I hope I just did justice to his name because I don't know how to pronounce German names. And what he did for me, Nick, and I'll pull this up for us, is he translated the Ethiopic out of the polyglot itself. And what you said was true. In one place, in your argument, you say that who will be, is there in the Ethiopic. You are correct about that.
And so that was my main point. It has the final part of the one who was and is and will be, the future part of that. And so in my book, I go in depth about how sometimes people will just say the one who was and will be. Some say one who was and is and will be. Some just say the one who is, or the eternal, or and so that's why I go in depth and relate it to the name of Jehovah. Hava means to be or not to be. So it's like to be. It means I am. So when you expand I am out, it's the past, the present, and the future. And so, and in my book, I'd go in depth about. How Bible translations over the years, even modern Bible translations, will sometimes have I was that I was instead of I am that I am, or I will be what I will be, or I shalt be what I shalt be. And so there's all these different things that can mean the past, the present, and the future, and they all mean that in I am, because it covers all those bases. And so that's, yeah, so what I've found is people try to say, because there's three parts, in the King James and in the Text Receptus, the past, the present, and future. If the present's missing, it's like, oh, see, it doesn't fit. Or, the first bit's missing, oh, see, it doesn't fit. It's like, no, I'm specifically talking about esomenos, the final will be, because that's the one that's changed. That's the one that's usually got the reading of holy there. And so regardless of what goes after it or before it, yes, I think all that is important, but at the end of the day, I'm focusing on esomenos. And so...
I'd like to state this. He made statements that these transmissions into the Ethiopic were very poorly done, a lot of misspellings and so forth. But I noticed that there was something missing even in the Ethiopic that was translated into Latin. There is who is and who will be, but there is no who was. The Tridact Declaration's not even in Ethiopic. And it's not based on anything like what we're suggesting Beza said about Jehovah. In fact, the word over here is actually God. Though it is a sacred name, Theos would be a sacred name, it is not Jehovah name on Korea. So,
but you do find that the name Lord can be translated as Theos, or Jehovah can be translated as Theos. It can be translated as Kyrios. And so it is interchangeable. And so there would have to be a little bit more scholarship there to say that when it says God there, it's not talking about, the Lord, because we're dealing with Ethiopic translation. Perhaps they only have one way of saying God. Perhaps that they said Lord and God as interchangeably. And so these are all questions that come up. And so to say that, well, it doesn't have it has God there, it's like, yeah, but it's still God. A God is a Lord in a sense, and God and Lord are interchangeable. Even the King James translators, at times, they would interchange that. So. So yeah, I felt that the Ethiopic actually had basis for Kyrios there.
Even in the Ethiopic translation here. So what happened and I want you to chime in on this, Nick, I'll give you a lot of time to explain. You come down here into Hoskier's edition of citations, and by the way, all the support says Hosios right here. Here's all the support.
So, I mean, this is the whole thing. That's all the support. As if I'm not in agreement there. I'm in 100% agreement there, but what I'm saying is that it's not a majority text type of thing. I'm not saying, okay, we've got half a manuscript here, or we got one manuscript over there. What I'm saying is that it's a name. So it's like, Jesus, the Son of God. If we had Jesus, the Son of Holy, or it's different to everywhere else that's in the Bible. It's different, and so the whole thing is the critical text has 2/3 of a name there. So you look at it and it's like, oh, actually, there's something missing there, and why would it be missing? Why is that missing there? And so that's and the whole thing is too, the reading of the King James and the reading of the Text Receptus appears in the Latin. It appears in Beatus of Libana. It appears in Haimo's commentary. And so how did it get into those? How was it there? It's not explained how this reading ended up in these other areas and ended up in early church writings and ended up in England in early church writings. And how did this end up all over the place? If all the Greek manuscripts are saying that, why? How come we see this pattern? And we don't see the pattern of who was and is to come. We specifically see who was and is and shall be. The specificness of that, and so it's not explained. And so, but let's continue.
Here's the translation of Dudley. You are righteous, and then he has Lord here. He mistranslated the Ethiopic.
So he mistranslated the Ethiopic. Okay, so I guess, I'll go through the Ethiopic and I'll show other places where Lord appears and this Ethiopic word is used. So that's probably something I'll have to do. But I don't think that Lord and God are that far detached from each other, especially when we're looking at a totally different language. If we were looking at Arabic or or anything like that, we would see similarities in these words. And so, but I'll look into that and I'll have a look. But I don't think that is really an issue. But and we're looking at the Ethiopic. The whole issue about the Ethiopic is that it has the reading shall be. I don't really care what it says before, after, but this, it's saying here that it does have God there, Domine, and so I'll go through for the next video. I'll look at Domine. I'll look at the Ethiopic word there, and we'll balance that up. But just for the moment, I'm just saying I don't think it's really a huge issue between God and Lord.
It had been God. And rectus right here, and then you're right about this part. This right here shows that this is the Ethiopic and the polyglot. You're right about this right here in your book. That is to be. But what I find interesting down here is Hoskier waited till he got to Kai Ha Hasios and the Holy One, and he cites one of the over here. This is a Coptic.
So Boheric.
Manuscript, and then he cites again back up here our polyglot, rectus pro sanctus ut supra.
So I'll just go for just a little bit. So with this issue, basically what he's saying here, and I'll actually get this up on my website. So Revelation 16:5. So when we have, and I heard the angel of the waters say, Thou art righteous, O Lord, which art and wast and shalt be, because thou hast judged thus. So here it says you are righteous. And so when we look at this wording here, it's basically rectus pro sanctus, or rectus could be for holy. So in other words, it could be a substitution where, instead of holy, they've actually substituted rectus. The word correct, just because they sort of rhyme, rectus and correctus, just means something straight, and so it means right. You're just. It's a proper judgment there, and so. But we do see in our text, because it was sort of like these. It's strange that we got that twice there, but when we look at the reading, it clearly says you are righteous, and then later on it says because you have judged thus. So there's also you're just. So you're just, rectus, because you judge correctly, you did this right, and so righteous and judged thus are there, and so I think the point that he was making here isn't valid. Let me just get it back up on the screen. And I did have... now I'm just trying to rush here because I don't want the battery of my phone to go flat. But the... yeah, no, that's all I've got written on that. And so the rectus pro sanctus et supra. So rectus or straight could be for sanctus or holy. So that's what he's saying there. But earlier he doesn't say that. And so the rectus, so basically rectus means straight or righteous. And so this is, Hoskier's, put this in there and said, that could be, for holy. And so, but when you read the text, it's for righteous judgment. And so I don't think that he's making a good claim here. and I will look more into it to see if there's any more than that. And what I'll do is I'll just let Stephen finish his sentence here, and then I'll have to shut it down. But
no, that's great, and I'm actually really glad that you're doing this type of research, because this is one of the reasons why I wrote the article, was because I'm obviously I don't have any scholarly credentials. I'm just a layman. I'm actually just a rookie guy, just trying to show some truths. And so when I wrote the book on Revelation 16:5, a lot of it I was pioneering certain ground and saying things that no one else was saying, and I was trying to soundboard off many people, including Jeff Riddle, and no one would really sort of touch the issue, because even a lot of TR guys are a bit like, oh, we're not sure about this whole thing. And so with the Ethiopic, what I found was in a lot of the early church writings and in other versions, because it's a noun phrase, sometimes you'll have the one who was and is to come. Sometimes you have the one who was and is to come. In the Arabic, it just says the eternal.
so obviously there I said is to come. I should have said shall be. But when you're on the spot, you say those things. So yeah, but in the Arabic, it just says eternal or I am. So.
Which is sort of like I am. It's like the eternal one. It's like, and so that's why I guess I put all that information in the book. Or one of the main reasons I put the information in the book was to refute James White's claim about it. But the secondary thing was so that people can look at the evidence and I guess use that as use my ceiling as a platform to go, oh, hang on, Nick, this is wrong, this is right. And so I had the guy from the Trinitarian Bible Society contact the other day through email, and he was agreeing with Jeff Riddle that the common, I think you put it on your screen earlier, the common Latin of Beza that basically speaks about this manuscript and how he restored it, that it has been mistranslated. And so I'm open to all those things. And so I guess because I've sort of pioneered a bit of a work, people then are saying, well, what about this and what about that? And I actually invite all that. And in a sense where I've probably said in the past the Ethiopic has the Triadic Declaration, but then I probably should be a little bit more careful and say, well, the Ethiopic has the final part of the Triadic Declaration, shall be, which is usually the one that everyone's arguing about. And so, but I really appreciate your study on that.
Would you admit that any place even in the Greek in chapter 1 or chapter 4, by the way, it's also a textual variant in chapter 11, is to...
So I'll deal with that next time. And so I'm going to shut it down here. But what we're going to deal with next time, I was hoping to deal with it today, but we're going to look at this article, which actually came out just at the beginning of this year. So this is by Elijah Hickson, where he actually goes through a lot of what was just mentioned. So we're looking at the Ethiopic there. We're looking at how it was translated. We're looking at Walton and people saying the guy who translated the Ethiopic into Latin was clumsy. But then when we look at all the notes on this, it's just loading there. We see Jan Kranz and a whole bunch of people, and they sort of say pretty much what I already said, that it says will be. And then they're all debating with each other, and it's sort of like no one seems to really know the reading. Like, does it mean this or does it mean that? And they're all asking each other, and it's like, well, so nothing of any... It's not really concrete what they're saying. And so I think it'll be good... I want to know as much as possible on this issue. And, I'm glad that, some of the leading world experts on the Bible at the moment are talking about this issue now. But I think at the end of the day, the Ethiopic does say will be. And I think Turretin fan or Francis Turretin on Facebook and James White have been wrong on this. And but yeah, so I'll deal with a little bit more on Hoskia's issue because I had a whole bunch of notes on that, but I can't seem to find it. And so I'll go through that, and I'll also go through some of the PA stuff that Stephen talked about. And then we've got about 10 minutes to go on the video. So, and then I'll sum up the debate and everything. So I'm going to shut it down now. And so I think I've gone for like 3 hours or something ridiculous. But I'll see you guys next time. I'm not sure when I'm going to do another video, but I'm glad that I got the vast majority of things that I wanted to say said. And so I'll see you guys next time.